The day my son left me, the sky was too beautiful for what was happening. Blue, endless, merciless, the kind of sky that makes you feel small enough to disappear beneath it. He didn't say much. Just loaded the last box into the back of his truck, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said, "You'll be safe here, Mom. You'll have peace." Peace. That's what he called it. I stood on the porch of that half-collapsed farmhouse, the wood groaning beneath my feet, and watched him drive down the dirt road until his taillights became nothing but fireflies swallowed by dust. He didn't look back. Not once. He said it was just temporary, a little getaway, he'd called it. But you can tell when someone's not planning to come back. You can feel it in the way they hug you, polite, brief, already halfway gone. The house he left me in looked like it hadn't been loved in decades. The paint peeled off like sunburned skin. The front yard was overgrown with weeds, and an old rocking chair leaned sideways on the porch like it had given up trying to stand. I told myself I wouldn't cry. But that night, when the crickets fell silent and the wind started whispering through the cracks, the tears came anyway. I'd spent my whole life taking care of people, and somehow ended up in a place where even the walls felt abandoned. It must have been close to midnight when I first heard her. A voice, faint, low, humming something that sounded like an old lullaby. At first, I thought it was the radio. But the sound came from outside, soft and haunting, floating through the broken fence that separated my house from the one next door. It was a woman's voice. And somehow, I knew that song. My heart stuttered in my chest. It couldn't be. That melody belonged to another life. A life I had buried years ago, along with all the people I swore I'd never speak to again. I went to the window. Across the fence, through the moonlight, I saw a silhouette sitting by the window of the old house next door, a woman with long, silver hair, still as a shadow, humming that same forgotten tune. I should have turned away. I should have closed the curtain and gone back to pretending I was fine. But I couldn't move. Because even from that distance, even through time and disbelief, I knew that voice. It was her. The one person I never wanted to see again. The one secret my son could never, ever find out. He thought he'd left me here to rest. But what he didn't know was that he'd left me right next to my past. And it was still very much alive. Morning came slow, heavy with fog and the smell of wet grass. I woke up to the sound of a rooster somewhere down the hill and the soft moan of the wind slipping through the cracks in the window frame. The old farmhouse was colder than it should have been. Every step on the floorboards groaned, like the house itself was warning me not to get too comfortable. When I pulled back the curtains, I saw the same dirt road Ethan had driven away on the day before. His tire tracks were still there, 2 long scars across the mud, fading into the woods that swallowed the horizon. He'd said this was a good place for me to heal. I don't know what he thought I was healing from. Maybe from losing his father. Maybe from him. From the slow way he'd been slipping out of my life since he got married. The air outside smelled of rain and pine needles. The yard stretched wide, overgrown with dandelions and old farm tools half buried in soil. The fence between my house and the neighbors was leaning, covered in ivy that looked like it had been growing for decades. I stared at that fence longer than I meant to. Because last night, I'd heard her, that humming, that voice I knew. The neighbor's house stood a little further back, hidden behind tall oaks. It looked abandoned from a distance, but when the light hit it just right, you could see faint movement behind the curtains, like someone watching but not wanting to be seen. I told myself it didn't matter. That I was too old for ghosts, and even older for regrets. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me there. Ethan called that afternoon. His voice came through the phone clear but distant, as if miles weren't just physical. They were emotional, too. "Hey, Mom. How's the house?" "Still standing," I said. "Barely. The floor's a mess, and the fridge hums like it's possessed." He laughed softly. "You'll get used to it. It's peaceful there." Peaceful. That word again. He didn't hear the loneliness underneath it. "Ethan," I said quietly, "you didn't leave me here because you didn't know what else to do with me, did you?" He went silent. I could hear his wife, Hannah, talking somewhere in the background, her voice sharp and cheerful. "Of course not, Mom," he said finally. "I just thought you needed a break from everything." From him, he meant. From being the mother who always called too often, asked too many questions, held on too long. "I'll come visit soon," he added. "Promise." I didn't say anything. Because promises, I'd learned, are the first things people forget. When I hung up, the house felt quieter than before, too quiet. I turned on the old radio just to fill the silence, but all I got was static. So I sat on the porch, rocking in the half-broken chair, staring at the field that stretched all the way to the tree line. That's when I saw her again. The neighbor. She was standing near the edge of her porch, hanging what looked like laundry, a faded white dress, a small towel, and something else I couldn't quite make out. Her movements were slow but graceful, almost ritualistic. Her hair, long, silver, and loose, glowed in the afternoon sun like threads of light. And then, without looking up, she started humming again. The same song. That lullaby, the one I used to sing when Ethan was little, before his father got sick, before everything fell apart. My heart froze. That tune didn't belong here. It belonged in a small yellow kitchen 200 miles away, in the life I'd already buried. I wanted to call out to her, ask how she knew it, but I didn't. Instead, I watched her until she turned toward the house and disappeared inside. That night, the past came back in fragments. The way Robert, my late husband, used to stand by the window late at night, thinking I didn't notice. The way his smile had started to fade a few years before the heart attack. And the way Claire, yes, that was her name, had entered our lives back then, through a church charity group. She had been kind. Too kind. Beautiful, too. In that effortless way some women carry beauty like a scent they don't know they have. Robert liked her company. Said she had a good heart. I believed him, until I didn't. Because kindness can sometimes feel like theft, a slow, silent taking of something you can't name. I remember the night everything changed. The way I found them, not together, not touching, not guilty in the way movies make it look. But guilty in silence. In a look. In the way her hand lingered on his arm just a second too long, and he didn't pull away. I never confronted her. I didn't have to. I just stopped answering her calls. Stopped smiling when she waved at me across the pew on Sundays. And when Robert died, 2 months later, I blamed them both. Her for being too close. Him for not stopping her. And myself, for knowing and doing nothing. I moved away. Started over. Or tried to. So when I saw her name, Claire Hensley, written on the mailbox next door the morning after I moved in, my knees almost gave out. It couldn't be the same woman. It shouldn't be. Not after all these years. But the voice, the song, that was hers. And God help me, part of me wanted to hear it again. Days passed. I avoided her, but I watched. Every morning, she sat by her window with a cup of tea and an old book. Every afternoon, she fed the crows that gathered near her porch. Every evening, that humming would drift across the fence again. It wasn't just a tune anymore, it was a memory calling out for recognition. One evening, I finally gave in. I baked an apple pie, my mother's recipe, and walked across the overgrown yard to her porch. The air was heavy with the smell of rain and pine. When I knocked, the sound echoed through the house like it hadn't heard visitors in years. After a moment, the door opened, slowly, hesitantly. And there she was. Her eyes widened the moment she saw me. Her hand trembled on the doorknob. "Linda," she whispered. I hadn't heard my name said like that in decades, softly, like it carried both guilt and affection. I forced a smile. "Hello, Claire." The silence that followed felt heavier than any storm. She invited me in. The house smelled of lavender and dust. There were books stacked everywhere, old photographs on the mantel, and a single chair pulled close to the window, her watching place. We sat opposite each other, two old ghosts pretending we weren't haunted. "I didn't know you'd moved here," I said quietly. "I didn't know you were still in Ohio," she replied. "Ethan told me once you moved to the city." I froze. "You know Ethan?" Her gaze lowered. "I did. A long time ago." My stomach turned. "How long ago?" She hesitated, just long enough to make me afraid of the answer. "Since he was a child," she said finally. "I used to visit Robert's store. We'd talk sometimes. About him. About you." My throat tightened. The air between us felt charged, fragile, dangerous. "You shouldn't have come here," I whispered. "You're right," she said. "But maybe it's time we both stop running from what's already done." That night, back in my house, I couldn't stop shaking. I replayed every word, every glance, every ghost that name had brought back. Ethan didn't know. He couldn't know. Because the truth, the one I'd buried for 30 years, wasn't just about Claire and Robert. It was about something that happened after. Something I'd done to make sure no one ever found out. And now, sitting in that crumbling farmhouse beside the only person who knew, I realized the past wasn't finished with me. It had simply been waiting, quietly, patiently, next door. The days bled into each other after that first visit with Claire. I told myself I wouldn't go back, but somehow I found reasons to wander close to that leaning fence, checking the mail, sweeping the porch, pretending to care about the garden that hadn't seen flowers in 20 years. Every time, I felt her eyes on me through the window. Not accusing, not welcoming, just watching. It was strange, two old women, both too proud to speak first, circling the same memories like vultures afraid of what they might find. One afternoon, rain started early. Thick drops splattered the porch, and the sky turned the color of bruised steel. I was halfway through closing the shutters when I saw her standing in her yard, motionless, staring up at the clouds. She didn't even try to move inside. Without thinking, I grabbed my umbrella and ran across the mud. "Claire!" I called out. "You'll catch your death out here." She turned, rain streaming down her face like tears that weren't hers to cry. "Maybe that's the point," she said softly. I froze. "Don't say things like that." "Why not? We both know there are worse things than dying." Her words hung between us, heavy and wet. "Come inside," I said. "Please." She didn't argue. Inside her house, the air smelled of rain, lavender, and old secrets. She handed me a towel, and for a moment our hands brushed, thin, trembling, too human. We sat across from each other again, the storm pounding on the roof. "Do you ever wonder," she said after a while, "if people really die? Or if parts of them just move into someone else's life, waiting to be found again?" I studied her face, the lines, the softness around her mouth, the sorrow that never quite left her eyes. "I think people die when we stop forgiving them," I said. "And I stopped forgiving a long time ago." She flinched, just slightly. "Robert," she whispered. My throat tightened. "Don't say his name. You think not saying it will make it hurt less." I stood, pacing. "He was my husband, Claire. And you. I never meant to take anything from you. You took everything." The words escaped before I could stop them. The house seemed to echo them back at me, everything, everything, everything. She rose slowly, her eyes glistening. "He came to me the night before he died," she said quietly. "Did you know that?" I turned toward her, heart pounding. "You're lying." "He was scared, Linda. He thought you didn't love him anymore." My breath caught. "He said that. He didn't have to." The rain hammered harder, drowning the silence that followed. I wanted to scream, to tell her she was wrong, that I had loved him, that I'd just been tired, lost, afraid. But the truth lodged somewhere deep, heavy as guilt. That night, I dreamed of Robert. He was standing in the old store again, counting bills by the light of a flickering bulb. He turned when he heard my voice, but it wasn't me he smiled at. It was her. I woke up shaking. The wind rattled the windows, and for a split second, I thought I heard that same humming again, only this time, it wasn't coming from Claire's house. It was coming from inside mine. The next morning, Ethan called. "Hey, Mom. Just checking in." His voice sounded tired. Maybe guilty. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said automatically. "How's Hannah?" "Busy." A pause. "We've been arguing. About money, mostly." I bit back the urge to tell him to come home. He wouldn't. He never did. "You should visit," I said instead. "It's peaceful here." He chuckled. "You're finally admitting it." "Something like that. Maybe next weekend. Hannah's got work, but I could drive up." The thought filled me with both relief and dread. Relief because I missed him. Dread because of Claire. If he came here, if he saw her, if he remembered her, I didn't know what would happen. Because once upon a time, when Ethan was just a boy, Claire had been part of his life too. He used to call her Aunt Claire. And what Ethan never knew, what I'd buried all those years ago, was that Robert hadn't just confided in her. He'd given her something that should have belonged only to us. A secret that, if Ethan discovered, would destroy the fragile forgiveness I'd spent a lifetime pretending to build. A few nights later, I heard footsteps outside my porch. I opened the door, and there she was again, standing in the glow of the porch light, soaked, shivering. "I'm sorry," Claire whispered. "I shouldn't have told you about that night." "Why now?" I asked. "After all these years." "Because the truth doesn't stay buried forever." Her eyes moved past me, toward the old photograph hanging in the hallway, the one of Robert holding Ethan at age 6. "He looks so much like his father," she said. "Don't. Does he ever ask about me?" "No," I snapped. "And you're not going to remind him?" She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. "He deserves to know who his father really was, Linda." "And you think you're the one to tell him?" Maybe I am. Something inside me broke then, the kind of break that doesn't make noise but leaves an echo. If you ever go near my son, I whispered, I will bury the truth myself, again, and I won't feel guilty this time. She didn't speak, just turned and walked away into the rain, vanishing like a memory swallowed by the dark. The next morning, I found an envelope on my porch. No name. Just one word on the front, written in Robert's handwriting. Forgive. Inside was a photograph, faded, creased, of Robert, Claire, and a little boy standing between them. Not Ethan. A younger child. Maybe 2 years old. On the back, in Claire's handwriting. His name was Daniel. He was ours. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. My knees gave out, and the photo slipped from my hands into the dirt. Daniel. I'd heard that name once before, whispered, half asleep, from Robert's lips in the hospital. I'd thought it was a dream. It wasn't. My husband had another child. With her. And now, all these years later, she lived next door. Waiting. Not for me, but for Ethan. The storm came without warning. By evening, the horizon turned the color of bruised fruit, purple, heavy, aching. The wind howled through the broken slats of the barn, and the air smelled of rain and iron. Linda sat by the window, her hands shaking around the chipped mug of coffee that had long gone cold. She hadn't slept. Not since that night Ethan walked in on her and Claire. Not since he demanded answers she couldn't give. Ethan had driven off in the middle of the night, headlights slicing through the dark like anger itself. Now, hours later, Linda sat there, replaying the look in his eyes. Not hatred. Worse. Disappointment. Deep, bone deep, the kind that makes you realize your child has finally seen who you really are. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping softly on the tin roof like hesitant fingers. Then came the knock. Linda's heart clenched. She already knew who it was before she opened the door. Claire stood there, hair soaked, rain dripping down her face. In her hands was a small wooden box, worn and water-stained, the edges frayed from years of being opened and closed. I couldn't let him leave like that, Claire said softly. Not without the truth. Linda stepped back, letting her in. The smell of wet earth followed her, filling the small living room with the scent of memory. Claire set the box on the table between them. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. The wind rattled the window panes. When Claire finally spoke, her voice was low, trembling, but steady. It's time, Linda. He deserves to know who his father was. Linda's breath caught. Don't. But Claire kept going. You can't keep punishing yourself for something we both lost. She opened the box. Inside was a bundle of old letters, yellowed with time, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Beneath them, a photograph, a man in uniform, smiling, his arm around a younger Claire. Daniel. The name still ached when it passed through Linda's mind. Ethan's father. Claire's husband. The man both women had loved, one legally, the other secretly. Linda turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. You think the truth fixes anything? It ruins everything. He'll hate me. He'll hate you. Claire's eyes glistened, but she didn't flinch. Maybe. But at least he won't live in the dark. Thunder cracked outside, a long, rolling growl that shook the glass. Then, from the doorway, a voice. I already know. Both women froze. Ethan stood there, drenched, his jacket heavy with rain. His eyes, his father's eyes, burned with something raw and unreadable. I went to town, he said quietly. Mrs. Dalton told me. She remembered you, Claire. She remembered Dad. She remembered everything. Linda's heart plummeted. Ethan stepped closer, his voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me, Mom? Why did you let me grow up thinking he died in some accident when he did die, Linda whispered, tears spilling. Just not the way they said. Claire sank into the chair, her face buried in her hands. It was my fault, she murmured. He tried to leave that night. Said he couldn't do this to either of us anymore. The storm took his car off the road. Ethan stared at her, then at Linda. And you both just buried it. Linda's voice cracked. How do you tell your son that the man who raised you, who you thought was your father, wasn't? How do you tell him that his real father was your neighbor's husband, and that he died because of what we did? Silence. The kind of silence that stretches years long. Outside, lightning split the sky. The old house trembled. Ethan looked from one woman to the other, two halves of a truth he'd never asked for. Then, without a word, he walked past them, out into the rain. Linda tried to follow, but Claire caught her wrist. Let him go. He needs space. But Linda tore free, running out into the storm barefoot. The rain stung her skin, but she didn't care. "Ethan," she screamed into the wind. "Please." He was standing by the edge of the field, staring at the flooded dirt road, the same road Daniel had died on 26 years ago. When he turned, his face was wet, from the rain, from tears, she couldn't tell. "I don't even know who I am anymore," he said. "Everything I believed about us, about you, it's all gone." Linda stepped closer, trembling. "You're my son. You'll always be my son. Nothing changes that." He shook his head. "It changes everything." Her voice broke. "Then let it. But don't let it take you from me." For a moment, it looked like he might walk away again. But then, slowly, painfully, he reached out and pulled her into his arms. And there, in the middle of the storm, between the graves of the past and the ruins of their home, Linda finally let herself collapse. Not out of weakness, but release. Because for the first time in decades, the lies were gone. And even if it cost her everything, she had finally told the truth. Morning came softly, as if the world had been holding its breath all night. The storm had passed, leaving everything soaked, the fields glistening, the old fence sagging, the porch coated in a thin film of mud and leaves. For the first time in weeks, the air smelled clean. Linda sat outside with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the mist lift off the grass. Her body felt heavy, but her chest, for the first time in years, felt strangely light. She had told the truth. And the truth, though it had nearly broken her, had also set her free. Ethan hadn't come back inside that night. She'd watched him through the window, sitting in his truck, headlights off, staring into nothing. At some point near dawn, he must have fallen asleep, because when she woke again, he was still there, eyes red, expression unreadable. Now, as the sun began to rise, he opened the door and stepped out. His clothes were still damp, his hair messy, his face raw with sleeplessness. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her on the porch, looking out at the same horizon. Finally, he said, "You could have told me, Mom." Linda's throat tightened. "I know. I spent my whole life wondering why you flinched every time I mentioned Dad. Why you'd shut down when people talked about him like some hero. I thought it was grief. But it was guilt, wasn't it?" She nodded, eyes glistening. "Both." He sat down beside her, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "I don't know how to forgive that yet." "I don't expect you to," she whispered. "I just need you to know I loved you. Every day. No matter how much I hated myself." For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't cruel anymore, it was just honest. Like two people standing in the wreckage of something, deciding whether to rebuild or just sit with the ruins. Claire came by later that morning. She looked older somehow, softer, smaller. She brought 2 mugs of coffee and a small bundle of flowers from her yard, lavender, white lilies, wild roses. "For him," she said, nodding toward the road where Daniel had died. Linda took them, her fingers brushing Claire's. No anger this time, no bitterness, only the quiet recognition of 2 women who had loved the same man and carried the same loss. Together, the 3 of them walked to the edge of the field. The dirt was still damp underfoot. Birds were beginning to return, their songs thin but hopeful. They stood by the fence as Linda laid the flowers down, the colors bright against the brown earth. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I forgive you." She wasn't sure if she was talking to Daniel, to Claire, or to herself. Maybe all 3. Ethan stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the distance. "I think I'd like to know more about him," he said quietly. Claire's lips trembled into a sad smile. "Then you should. He wasn't perfect, Ethan. But he loved you, both of you, more than he ever knew how to say." They stayed there for a while, until the wind grew colder and the sun climbed higher. On the way back, Ethan walked ahead. Claire lagged behind. And for a moment, Linda lingered in the middle, between past and future, between guilt and grace. Inside the house, the clock on the mantel ticked again, something it hadn't done in years. She hadn't noticed it had stopped, but now it clicked with quiet rhythm, marking a new kind of time. Ethan packed some of his things that afternoon. "I'm going to stay in town for a few days," he said. "Think things through." Linda nodded. She didn't ask him to stay. Love, she realized, isn't always about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting the other person find their own peace. Before he left, he turned to her. "Mom." She looked up. "I don't hate you." Her breath caught. He didn't say he forgave her. Not yet. But that single sentence was enough to keep her standing. When the door closed behind him, The house didn't feel as empty as she thought it would. It felt still. Days turned into weeks. The fields dried. The air grew warmer. Linda began to fix small things, a loose shutter, a broken step, the leaky kitchen sink. Each repair felt like a conversation with herself, a way of saying, "You're still here. You still matter." Claire visited often. Sometimes they talked for hours. Other times they just sat, drinking tea, watching the wind ripple through the grass. There was no neat ending, no perfect healing. But there was honesty, and that, Linda thought, was a kind of grace. One evening, she found herself standing at the same window where she'd first heard that haunting lullaby. The sun was setting, painting the world in gold and rust. She thought of Daniel, his laugh, his eyes, his terrible kindness. She thought of Ethan, the way his anger mirrored her own youth. And she thought of herself, all the versions of her that had lived and broken and survived. She whispered into the empty room, "We did our best." Outside, a wind swept through the trees, gentle, like an answer.